What's up, guys? It's three-time NFL Pro Bowler, all-decade return specialist, Josh Cribbs. I want to welcome you to the Mac Sports Connection podcast, where Alex hosts all things Mac, all things football, all things sports, right here, Mac Sports Connection, baby. The Mid-American Conference best, bringing it only the great Mac to everyone.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Mac Sports Connection podcast. I'm your host, Alex the Captain. Thank you so much for joining me this week. It's part 2 of my mini-series, The Greatest Sports Team from Each Mac School in Their History. As you guys remember from the last episode, the criteria is pretty open-ended. It's not really defined. I mean, I have my own definitions, but I look at a lot of different things. I don't look at just, oh, they won a national championship, or, oh, they went undefeated. Nothing like that, because it's so hard to compare eras unless you're doing just numbers. It's so hard to compare sports, right? You know, people can talk about volleyball being a fantastic sport, which it is. I don't want to discredit volleyball at all. They can talk about volleyball being a fantastic sport, and trying to compare that to a football season or a basketball season can be extremely difficult. So I've charged myself with the task, really, of trying to find the greatest sports team for each MAC program. Last time we did the first 6 schools in the MAC in terms of alphabetical order, so from Akron to Eastern Michigan, you guys are covered. You guys can go check that episode last week if you missed it. This week, we are starting with Kent State. We're going Kent State, Miami, Ohio, Northern Illinois, Ohio University, University of Toledo, Western Michigan, and for my UMass fans, I decided to do some research on UMass. We also have another segment of the MAC Baseball Rundown brought to you by Graham Giles. Really looking forward to giving that to you guys as well, so let's just dive in. When I look at Kent State, it's really hard to do this for Kent State. They've had such phenomenal athletic programs over the years, and every single one of those programs deserves their flowers. I had far more finalists for Kent State than I've had for any other school. The 2012 College World Series baseball team, officially the Elite Eight, if you will. The 2002 NCAA Tournament Elite Eight team. Seems to be a theme going on here with Elite Eight. The 2012 men's golf team finished 5th in the nation. The 1990 softball team finished 7th nationally. And the 2011 gymnastics team, they finished 12th nationally. They were the first MAC team to qualify for the Gymnastics National Championships. I know what you're thinking. Alex, there's no football. You're not bringing up football. Look at the legends of Gary Pinkel, Nick Saban, Jack Lambert. What are you doing? Well, guys, I got to be honest with you. I'm looking at it here. That 1972 MAC championship team, as great as those guys were, coached by the legendary Don James, they went 6-5-1. You tied with Akron for the wagon wheel. You got shut out twice in the regular season, at Louisville and then at home against San Diego State. Never fun to lose at home. You lost to Western Michigan, granted by a point. You get blown out by Northern Illinois 28-7. And then you lose to Tampa, who, by the way, doesn't have a football team anymore. You lose to Tampa 21-18 in the Tangerine Bowl. You finished 6-5-1. You did go... However, I will give you did go 4-1 in conference play. Now, granted, this was back when the MAC had 6 conference teams. So you had Kent State, Bowling Green, Western Michigan, Miami, Toledo, and Ohio. So I don't want to sit on the football team too much, but your best football team in school history, in terms of winning a championship, not that great. Now, I could talk about the 2012 team. 2012 team made a great run, beat Rutgers in the regular season, was ranked at the end of the season, and I think that is arguably the greatest football team in Kent State history. But for our purposes, it does not finish as the greatest single season team in Kent State history. No, looking at it, this was such a tough one. Again, gymnastics finishing 12th in the country in 2011. After finishing second in the Ann Arbor Regional, basketball with an Elite Eight run, baseball with a College World Series run, men's golf. But when I sit here and I look at all of it and I look at all the data, no matter what the feat is on the court, the diamond, everything, I'm inclined to give the nod here to baseball back in 2012. And I know I'm already hearing the booing and the hissing from the faraway crowd over in Kent right now. But you gotta really look at what this team did. They were the third seed in the Gary, Indiana regional, and I'm probably wrong on the actual name of the regional, but it was played in Gary, Indiana. Kent State knocked off Kentucky twice. They beat Purdue. Then they took 2 of 3 from Oregon in the Super Regional. Then they beat number 1 Florida before finally bowing out to South Carolina in the World Series. I think this is not only one of the greatest teams in Kent State history, this is one of the greatest teams in MAC history. I think that honor could go to a couple teams from Kent State, probably also the basketball Elite Eight run, but for my money, the College World Series run has to be the winner. Moving on, we are moving to the Miami Redhawks down in Oxford, Ohio. Another great MAC school with a lot of great history. And I looked at a couple contenders, really broke down everything. You guys know my love affair with the Miami field hockey team. That is a great program. I love those coaches, those players. Overall, really great. And I really want to select the 2020 Miami field hockey team. They went 13-2, 10-0 in MAC play. For me, it's really difficult to select that team, as great as they were. It's really difficult to select that team when the 2009 ice hockey team exists. They were in the Frozen Four and then the eventual national championship runner-up. The 2009 synchronized ice skating team, they won a national championship. They've actually got 3 national championships. That seems to be their most recent one. And then 2003 football, 13-1 with a bowl win. First time in history that they have gone 8-0 in Mid-American Conference play. This one was a really tough one. And kind of looking at all of this, looking at all these numbers, breaking it all down, I have to put my own personal bias aside. I gotta go with the football team. 13-1 is not something MAC schools do, especially not anymore. You had future NFL Hall of Famer and star Ben Roethlisberger at quarterback. This is shortly after the Travis Prentice run in the backfield. But this Miami team was absolutely loaded. When you look at everything that they did, they won the MAC for the first time since 1986. They went, again, 13-1, 8-0 in conference play. They beat Bowling Green 49-27 in the MAC championship. This was actually at Deutsch Perry Stadium. This is the last MAC championship game played on campus sites. The next year it would be played in Detroit at Ford Field, where the Toledo Rockets would take down this same Miami team. Well, maybe a little bit different Miami team. But 13-1, 8-0 in conference play. They got invited to the GMAC Bowl, which is no longer a bowl game. They actually beat Louisville 49-28, almost the exact same margin of victory that they beat Bowling Green by in the MAC championship. This Miami team was incredibly talented. The impressive thing really was that they started off the season at Iowa, and they lost 21-3. But then right after that, they went on a 13-game win streak, including a win the following week at another Big Ten foe, Northwestern. Miami's got a pretty good history against Northwestern. Then they travel out to Colorado State, and then they host Cincinnati at Yager Stadium, the battle for the victory bell. And then you just go down, you continue to play. November 4th, they take on Bowling Green at Yager Stadium. They beat them 33-10. And they finally crack the top 25. And then subsequent victories over Marshall, Ohio, and UCF had them at 15 in their matchup with Bowling Green again for the MAC championship. Both Bowling Green and Miami were ranked 15 and 23 respectively. And then they beat Louisville in the bowl game. That actually propelled them into the top 10 in terms of national rankings. This was an incredibly talented team. This was an unprecedented team. This was really the BCS era, but early BCS, and it was a whole different time of football. Really the time of football that I think a lot of us kind of crave anymore, if I'm being really honest. But this was a very special team. This Miami Redhawks team came out, dominated. I love the synchronized swimming national championships. I love what field hockey has done. I love what the hockey team has done. But I've got to give the nod here to football just for what they were able to do and what they were able to accomplish. Next up on our list, we've got the Northern Illinois Huskies. I know exactly what you're all going to say, and I expect that some of you are going to turn this off, but I'm not picking the football team. The 2012-2013 run was incredible, crashing the BCS as the MAC was an unbelievable experience. I remember watching that game with friends and pulling for Northern Illinois, and that was such an incredible experience, and it was so cool to see the MAC represented on such a big stage. However, believe it or not, there are other contenders that I feel are worthy of being talked about. You know, I could sit here and I could talk about the baseball team and their run at the NCAA tournament back in 1996. I could talk about the men's basketball team and their run at the NCAA tournament in 1996. That was a really good year for Northern Illinois sports, by the way. I could sit here and talk about men's tennis, who's had some pretty good years. The women's basketball program, they've done a great job. I've got stuff on them as well. And I've really got stuff on the women's volleyball team as well, who, when I looked at this, I really liked what the volleyball team has done, including their most recent appearance in the NCAA tournament back in 2016. But when I did a little bit more digging, because that's what I like to do, I stumbled across a team who advanced to the NCAA tournament, won the conference, did what they needed to do to go and compete. Now, keep in mind, this isn't necessarily when the team was in the Mid-American Conference. It's that they're a current Mid-American Conference member, so I do want to add that clarity. But I did some digging, went back into the archives, and I think for me, my pick for Northern Illinois has to be the 1988 women's softball team. This women's softball team, when you actually look at it, unbelievably impressive. They won the Midwest Regional. They knocked off Bowling Green 4-3 in one of the games. Then they knocked off Illinois State twice to win the regional. They actually won the regional 3-1 after it was all said and done. Then they advanced to the NCAA tournament, or the College World Series, I guess is what it was officially called. These are the top 8 teams in the country, the last of the last. This was a great run for them. They went on a 16-game win streak in the middle of the regular season. They swept through, I think it was the North Star Conference tournament at the time. That was the conference that they were aligned with and affiliated with. They finished the postseason ranked as the number 8 team in the country. They jumped as high as 10 nationally with a 35-11 overall record. And that was one of the best winning percentages in program history. Moving past that, they actually, like I said, beat Bowling Green in the Midwest Regional. Bowling Green was hosting that. So that was here in Ohio. That was in MAC country. Northern Illinois does their job and gets the win in the Midwest Regional. Then they go to the National Championship Tournament, the Elite Eight, the College World Series. and they lose a 1-0 decision to UCLA. After that, they lose to Texas A&M 3-0, and that ends their run at the College World Series. It's worth noting and pointing out that this team not only held UCLA to one run, it was, according to the record books, an unearned run in the first inning, but they were the team who played UCLA the closest the rest of the tournament until the World Series championship games. UCLA would eventually go on to win the national championship in softball that year, but Northern Illinois had an incredible run, and they are, according to the record books at the time, the first team to win a postseason regional in their first ever appearance in the postseason. To me, that speaks volumes. That is special. I got to give the nod to Northern Illinois softball from 1988. Up next, we have another edition of the MAC Baseball Rundown. Graham, take it away.
Heads up, baseball fans. You're in between the bases again. Caught in another MAC Baseball Rundown. Bless my soul, Bowling Green is on a roll. The Falcons are heroes and their loss column zeros as BGSU maintains their undefeated conference record and holds on to first place in the MAC. DJ Newman keeps on spinning it. He's top 5 in the conference in ERA and opposing batting average. And don't forget, he's also a menace at the plate, slashing .348, .441, and .643 with 3 triples and 8 home runs. The Falcons will look to continue their winning ways in the conference as they host the Ohio Bobcats for a 3-game set this weekend. The Huskies fans' cries have gone unheeded as Northern Illinois could only secure 1 win since our last rundown. They've sunk to 8th in the MAC with a conference record of 6-9. NIU will hope to turn things around as they take on the Golden Flashes of Kent State this weekend. Just call him Joey Chestnut because Brendan Kleiman is a pro behind the dish. The Eastern Michigan catcher went on an incredible 4 for 5 at the plate with a walk and 5 RBIs in an 11-inning, 4-hour, and 28-minute marathon of a game against the Kent State Golden Flashes on April 6th. The Eagles are 6th in the conference with a record of 8-7 in MAC play. The Ball State Cardinals have been flying high since our last rundown, going 7-1 these past 2 weeks and climbing to 5th in the conference. Keegan Johnson fanned 10 in 6 shutout innings against Miami on April 6th. The freshman struck out the side in the 5th and had at least 1 punch-out in every inning to lead the Cardinals to their 8th straight win. Johnson has 53 strikeouts on the season and is tied for first in the conference with a 5-0 record. Meanwhile, this past weekend, Ball State turned Tracy Turnblad hearing the bells as Hunter Dobbins demolished dingers in each game of Ball State's series against Akron. For the week, the catcher started all 3 games while sporting a perfect fielding percentage, an .889 batting average, and 2 doubles and 4 home runs. That's 22 total bases, 10 RBIs, 2 walks, and 6 runs scored. Call me Inspector Clouseau because all I want is Umberger. Toledo senior Grant Umberger struck out 9 and led up only 4 hits and 1 walk in 6 scoreless innings for the Rockets in a 12-1 victory over Kent State on Saturday. Toledo has now won 5 of 6 MAC series this season, losing only to Western Michigan. Toledo sits 3rd in the conference at 11-6. The Flash's offense was electric last weekend as Kent State took 2 of 3 from Eastern Michigan at home. The Flashes scored 41 runs with Josh Johnson driving in 9 and crossing the plate 5 times himself. Johnson stole a bag and handled all 6 chances in the field. Kent State is 8-6 in the conference, good for 4th place. No big bounce back for the Rubber City as Akron has notched only 1 win since our last rundown. The Zips are still last in the conference with a record of 1-14. Western Michigan's Brady Miller was living the high life as he allowed only 4 hits in 7 innings of shutout work against the Miami Redhawks on April 13th. Miller sat down 11 batters in a row at one point during the middle of his afternoon. The Broncos completed their second consecutive MAC shutout and extended their shutout streak in conference play to 22 consecutive innings. After Saturday's outing, Miller ranks 5th in WMU's career record book in both innings pitched and strikeouts. Western Michigan is 11-4 in MAC play and is in second place in the conference. I don't know about everybody, but the Ohio Bobcats were working for the weekend. Right fielder Paulie Mancino went 2 for 5 with a home run, 2 RBIs, and a stolen base on Saturday, while third baseman Nick Dolan went 3 for 4 with a home run and a stolen base on Sunday, as Ohio took 2 of 3 from Eastern Michigan. The Bobcats are 9th in the conference at 6-12. Trust the Gordon third baseman. Miami's Tyler Gordon went 3 for 3 with 2 RBIs, and pitcher Carson Bryars had 4 strikeouts in his 2.1 innings of work as the Redhawks battered Ball State 11-1 on April 7th. Miami is currently 7th in the MAC with an 8-10 record in the conference. And finally, Central Michigan has got to be sick of birds as they were run over by the Bowling Green Falcons this weekend, and their team bus tangled with a turkey. The Chippewas prospects don't look much better than the Turkeys, as CMU is 5-13 and second to last in the conference. And that, baseball fans, is your MAC Baseball Rundown. I'll catch you next time between the bases.
All right, Graham, thank you so much for another great MAC baseball rundown. Guys, I really hope you enjoy the effort and time Graham has been putting into that to give you a quality recap of what's happening in MAC baseball. We're going to go ahead and move on to the Ohio Bobcats, and this one was interesting. There were a lot of things I could have picked, and I'm going to be honest with you, looking at their history, it feels like basketball and football have truly been king. Basketball, of course, has a team who made it all the way to the Elite Eight, a couple of Sweet 16 appearances. Football, they have a small college division national championship, one that they boast very proudly, and they should. This was back in 1960, an era in which college football was still very weird. They had university division teams and college division teams playing in the same conference. Like Toledo was considered a university division team, while Ohio was considered a small college team. But they were both in the Mid-American Conference. So it's just a lot of weird things kind of happening. Same with Bowling Green, who won the national championship in the small college division the year before. So again, just a lot of weird things happening, but college football was weird. This was a national championship that was voted on. They did have an impressive record. They finished 10-0, 6-0 in MAC play. They had a ranked win over Bowling Green at Bowling Green, who was number 4 in the country in the small college division. So it's not without merit. This was a well-deserved national championship, but it was voted on. There was no postseason bowl. There was nothing to showcase, hey, this is a team that went out and really did something really special. They played Southern Illinois at home, was the final game of the season. And that's it. There was no, like I said, there was no bowl game. There was no really anything. And I don't know, it's just one of those things you look at it and you say, this is great, but does it carry a lot of weight? I think it does. I think it's an important victory and an important thing to celebrate for the Bobcat community. And they should celebrate a national championship, especially at the Mid-American Conference level. But I think I'm going to divert my winner over to the basketball side, the men's basketball team specifically. 1964, they had a great team, an Elite Eight appearance, and they were a really, really good team. But I think I'm going to look at one, and this is, again, with a lot of recency bias, and I fully recognize that. The 2012 men's basketball team. One name everybody knows, DJ Cooper. That's a guy who not only led this team, but he ended up playing professional ball, and I believe he's actually still playing internationally. I could be wrong on that, but he graduated in 2013, entered the NBA draft. This was an impressive team. They were 29-8 overall, finished 11-5 in MAC play. They were actually the 3rd seed in the MAC tournament that year, knocking off Toledo in the quarterfinals, Buffalo in the semifinals, and then Akron 64-63 in the tournament championship. The Bobcats would get the 13th seed in the NCAA tournament, and as we know, for whatever reason, Ohio has a great proclivity to be underseeded when they get to the NCAA tournament. One of the days, hopefully soon, the tournament committee will eventually figure this out. But they take on Michigan, who is the 4th seed in that regional. I want to say it was the South regional. I could be very wrong in that, but I believe it was the South regional. But they knock off number 4 Michigan, 65-60. Then they advance to take on the 12 seed South Florida Bulls, knock them off 65-56, or 62-56, I apologize. And then they advance to take on number 4 North Carolina. This is number 4 ranked North Carolina. They were a number 1 seed in this regional. The number 4 team in the country, the Ohio Bobcats, fall in overtime, 73-65, to end their season in the Sweet 16. For me, I remember watching this team. I remember social media blowing up about this, and this was back in the earlier days of Twitter. This was back in the earlier days of Instagram and all that. This was an impressive team, a team that I was unbelievably excited to watch. I remember being a student at Toledo, going to the going to the MAC tournament, and watching the Bobcats break our hearts. Little did I know at the time that they would go on to have the season that they would, especially in the NCAA tournament. But this was an exciting time for Ohio. As many of you know, I know all of you would stand up and cheer for this. And we all did in the Mid-American Conference. So for me, it's got to go to the 2011-2012 men's basketball team. That Sweet 16 run was nothing short of impressive. They looked great down the stretch. They had a 6-game win streak, including the MAC tournament, 2 wins in the NCAA tournament, and then they closed out the regular season, of course, with a win over Miami. For me, you got to give it to this tournament team, and I think it's the right choice. Again, nothing against the football national championship. Great job with what they did there, and nothing against the 1964 Elite Eight run, but I think you got to give it to the 2011-2012 men's basketball team. Up next, we have the Toledo Rockets. And I know a lot of you guys are going to say, Alex, this is your team, this is your school. That is correct. I'm not going to dispute that. I'm not going to disparage that at all. This is going to be the one that I'm going to have the hardest time deciding because I know this program and this school so well. This one came down to a couple of things for me. I think it was very easy to look at the Toledo football team from 1969 to 1971. Any of those 3 I could pick. That was part of the 35-0 run. I could look at the 2011 Toledo women's basketball WNIT championship. I think that's a very valuable one to look at as well. I could also look at the 2023 women's basketball team who advanced to the round of 32 in the NCAA tournament. There's a lot of great things I could talk about with Toledo. They had the softball team, went to the NCAA tournament back in 2017. But I think when I look at everything and I kind of break it all down, again, you look at just what these teams have done, what these teams have continued to do to impress. For me, I got to go the 2011 Toledo women's basketball team. This was really, if you're a Toledo fan, one of the most meaningful things that's ever happened to Toledo. This is a team who really many people thought kind of deserved an at-large bid into the NCAA tournament. And I think, frankly, I agree. They finished 29-8 that year, 14-2 in the Mid-American Conference. They won the ASU Classic, and then they went on to win the WNIT. Now, when you look at what they kind of did throughout that season, they started off the season 2-0. They lost to Purdue at the preseason WNIT tournament, and then they lost to Missouri State in that same tournament in the consolation finals. But then after that, they won the Iona Thanksgiving Classic. They went on a pretty solid run. They only lost 2 more games in non-conference play at Northwestern and then at Dayton. But then they finished out conference play 8-5. They looked really good, and then they jumped on it early. They went on a tear. They started off 4-0 in conference play before a hiccup against Central Michigan up in Mount Pleasant. And then they went on another run. They went from 4-1 to 13-1, so a 9-game win streak before a clunker at Northern Illinois. Then they wrapped up the regular season with a win over Central Michigan. Then they beat Akron in the quarterfinals, lost another clunker to Eastern Michigan in the semifinals. But this was a Toledo team who was 22-7, 23-7 after the Akron win, 23-8 after losing to Eastern Michigan. And this was also at a time when the MAC wasn't getting a lot of respect on the women's side. The men were having a little bit of issues trying to get multiple bids as well, but the women, they weren't really getting a lot of that love and respect that a lot of people felt they deserved, myself included. They get picked to go to the WNIT. Now, the way the WNIT worked at this time, and I still think it works this way, but the way the WNIT worked at this time was it was a bidding process to host. And the universities would submit bids to say, hey, we'll host this round. And every time you won, you could place a bid again to host and continue to host. Well, this is Tricia Cullop, who's now the head coach at the Miami Hurricanes. This is her 3rd year. And Toledo has the rare opportunity, especially for a MAC team or a mid-major team, they get the rare opportunity to actually host all 6 rounds of the WNIT tournament. They bring in Delaware, take care of them, beat them by 3. They bring in Auburn out of the SEC, beat them by 15. They bring in Alabama out of the SEC, beat them by 15. Their closest game in this tournament was Syracuse, who they beat 71-68 in overtime. This was in the quarterfinals. They beat Charlotte in the semifinals, beat them by 23 in front of over 7,000 fans. And then in the WNIT championship, a girl named Nama Shafir, that might be a name that most of you will recognize if you are a Toledo fan or if you're a MAC fan in general, goes off for 40 points in a big 76-68 victory over the USC Trojans. This is the first major postseason tournament that any MAC school has won. A lot of MAC schools have made appearances and gotten to certain points and have done a great job of reaching championships and semifinals, whatever. But this is the first major postseason basketball tournament that a basketball team in the Mid-American Conference has won, and they did it in pretty dominant fashion. You know, there's a lot of disappointment in Cleveland that year with the team not advancing to the NCAA tournament, but Tricia Cullop got this team ready to go, focused and rebounded, and they would go on to win the WNIT with an incredible roster. Ndola Dortch, Jessica Williams, Riley McCormick. These are all great players. Melissa Goodall, Yolanda Richardson, and it's so fun to kind of reflect on this. Kyle Baumgardner, Haley Lynn, Courtney Ingersoll, Nama Shafir, Janelle Reed-Lewis. This was just an unbelievably incredible team that I don't think people realize just how good this team was. And some people will discredit it and say, well, the SEC schools or Southern California didn't care because it wasn't the NCAA tournament. And I will disagree with you all day long and twice on Sundays. You have an opportunity to win a championship, WNIT, NIT, whatever it is. There's an opportunity to win a championship. Those players cared. This is before the NIL. This is before players really opted out as a norm. This was an opportunity to win a championship, and to celebrate something with your community. And I think this is such a significant thing, not because of the championship, but because the city of Toledo really bought into Toledo women's basketball. Trisha Cullop came in and inherited a great culture, but it was this team and this tournament run that elevated that to the next level. It's funny that Toledo would actually go on the next year and lose to Syracuse in the quarterfinals. I believe it was the quarterfinals in the WNIT tournament. So there was a little bit of a rivalry there for a few years. But this team is 1,000% deserving of the best single-season team in Toledo history. Again, no disrespect to what football did with Frank Lauterbur and the amazing job his guys did to get to 35-0 with Chuck Ely, and just an unbelievable job in a time when that was unprecedented. To me, the basketball win and the basketball team of 2010-2011 was far more impressive, winning the WNIT. All right, last but not least, we have the Western Michigan Broncos. Now, this one was a lot of fun, and I am going to catch hell for my pick on this one. I can already tell you, and I'm fine with that. Western Michigan has a rich history in terms of all of their sports. They've done an amazing job with what they've done. College World Series championship appearances, football, making it to a New Year's Six Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, and playing Wisconsin right to the gun. Soccer has done excellent. Softball, they've been in the College World Series a couple times. Volleyball's made some great things happen. There's a lot of tough things to do here. Cross country, they have 2 national championships, 1964 and 1965. For me, looking at all of these things, I went with the 1983 Western Michigan women's volleyball team. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying, Alex, you're crazy. I can't believe you'd pick that. What about the Cotton Bowl? What about all the... I get it. I really do. And I understand where you're coming from, because the Cotton Bowl was great. The baseball runner-ups have been great. I mean, just a lot of great history in Western Michigan athletics. But when you actually look at what the volleyball team did back in 1983, I think it's very, very important to recognize this was something special. They went 32-1 that year. That's right. That's not it. That's not a typo. That's not a speech error. 32-1. They won all 30 regular season games, and then they beat Nebraska, who's a current volleyball power, in the NCAA tournament. There were over 8,500 fans to witness that Western Michigan-Nebraska game. We saw it relatively recently. Nebraska played at the football stadium in front of a huge crowd, and that set NCAA attendance records, that did a bunch of great things for college volleyball, and I think that was a brilliant move by Nebraska. My hats are off to them. They watched 8,500 people pack into Western Michigan's volleyball facility. I think it was doubling as the basketball, but it was at the time they were using it for volleyball. 8,500 people packed into this place. That was a then NCAA record. This was unprecedented. This was one of the most incredible things that you could kind of witness. I mean, it started like I'm sure every volleyball season did. You win a few games, you get more interest. But as you're moving forward and you're advancing and the wins just keep coming, people get excited. This wasn't merely just winning, 25 games and you do well and it's like, hey, we had a great season. You went undefeated in the regular season. Then you won 2 postseason games before finally losing. To me, this screams so much importance, not only for Western Michigan, because I think this was a huge moment for Western Michigan, a great opportunity to get your brand on the national stage, especially in a time when women's sports weren't really focused on. But this was a massive opportunity, and I really think that when you compare it to some of these other sports, again, baseball with the runner-ups, when you compare it to Western Michigan and the Cotton Bowl. Does anybody know that Cotton Bowl attendance by the Western Michigan faithful? I don't. I know that there were over 82,000 people on hand at the Cotton Bowl, and I know that Western Michigan did an incredible job when they played in the MAC championship. There were over 45,000 people on hand at Ford Field for that MAC championship game. So Western Michigan did an excellent job with getting people excited. I know they set home attendance records for football, and they just looked excellent. They climbed as high as 15 in the nation in terms of national rankings. They are incredibly deserving, and I am not taking anything away from them. This volleyball team changed women's sports for the better. You're now seeing attendance records being broken, it seems like yearly. This was an unprecedented and well-earned recognition for Western Michigan. So for me, it's a very easy decision. The 1983 volleyball team with their 32-1 record. You don't see that happen anymore. 32-1. To me, that's the clear and obvious choice for Western Michigan and their greatest single-season team in school history. Now, I know I lied just a moment ago. I said that was the final one. However, I know I have people from UMass listening, so I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a taste to see how my research chops stood up against your memory and what you guys value in terms of some of the great teams and years, really, in UMass history. I think a couple obvious ones that I have to look at. UMass basketball back in 1996. Few things going on with that, and we can discuss that here in a little bit. The 1998 football team, we can discuss that as well. We've got the 2021 hockey national champions, or really, we've got any of the NCAA Women's College World Series softball appearances. I think when I look at it, softball, as great as that's been, and that softball program is one of the most dominant sports at UMass as it looks, just looking at records and their recent history, I think I've got to eliminate them. I think they are the odd man out here. Or I guess odd woman out. I apologize. When I look at the basketball team, the 1996 team was special. That was an NCAA tournament team who reached the Final Four. They were very, very, very well coached. John Calipari. You guys all know that name. That's a name we all know and love. When I look at the football team, we've got the 1998 national championship down at the FCS level. Can't complain about that too much. Then when you look at the hockey team, the 2021 national championship, that's a pretty special thing to have in terms of really anything, and especially a modern era national championship. I think I'm going to pass on the 1996 basketball team, not because it wasn't special, but for the scandals surrounding that team. Calipari, obviously, he left UMass to go coach at the NBA, to go coach the New Jersey Nets. They won the A-10 5 times in the 90s, and I mean, that's an impressive. Multiple Elite Eight appearances and a Final Four appearance. However, there were sanctions that came down on UMass in the 1996 team. You guys know the name, Marcus Camby. He took clothes, money, jewelry from an agent during the regular season, and they have now vacated that 1996 tournament team. Now, I do want to say this. Obviously, we kind of scoff at that in today's NIL and all of that stuff. To me, you cannot discount the play on the field or the court or the diamond if we're talking softball, baseball. Those games still happen. UMass still made the Final Four. An agent gave him jewelry, clothing, but that didn't improve his performance. I know that, again, we laugh at that and we think it's kind of silly about those sanctions now, but I still fail to see where that improved his performance. It wasn't like he was doing steroids. It wasn't like he was out here getting some one-on-one coaching from, well, at the time, Michael Jordan, who is the most dominant player in basketball. No, he took clothing, jewelry, illegally per NCAA rules, and I get that. These games were still played. They still won. They still advanced all the way to the 1996 Final Four. I'm eliminating it only because I know it's still celebrated by fans, but there is a dark mark on that season. We move over to hockey. The 2021 National Championship was a special team. 16-5-4 in the regular season. This was a good team out of the Hockey East League, and this is not a sport I'm terribly familiar with, so please forgive me for any butchering that I may do on this, UMass fans. But they were the number 2 seed in the East region, I guess, in the NCAA tournament. They went on to beat Lake Superior State 5-1, Bemidji State 4-0, Minnesota Duluth in overtime 3-2, and then St. Cloud State in the national championship 5-0. Their closest game was their semifinal game against Minnesota Duluth. This was a really dominant team, especially in the tournament. An incredibly impressive program. What UMass was able to do. I mean, this was special. This is again one of those championships that you love to have, especially in the modern era. And UMass had a great team. 16-5-4 was one of the lower in terms of record teams available. Boston University went 10-4-1. It looks like some of those games got canceled because of COVID, which explains the record. Notre Dame 14-13-2. They received an at-large out of the Big Ten. Omaha 14-10-1. So there were 16 teams in this tournament. UMass won the whole thing. You got to give your flowers to them. You got to give hats off to where hats off are due. But I think for me, when it comes down to all of it, I got to give this to the football team, the 1998 National Championship football team. This was a team under Don Brown, who is the defensive coordinator, under Mark Whipple in his first season. They were in the A-10 conference. This was a really good team. They actually lost 3 games on the year. And this is why I love why they won this national championship. Most teams today, you lose 1 game, you're not even considered for the playoffs. They lost 3. They actually lost their first game of the year to number 3 Delaware. They lost their 7th game of the year to number 15 Connecticut. And then they lost to Connecticut again in what looks like might have been the conference championship game. Now, they went on to the NCAA tournament for FCS. They beat McNeese State, Lehigh, Northwestern State, and then throttled Georgia Southern in the national championship 55-43. This actually took place down in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So fans traveled from both Georgia and Massachusetts to watch the Minutemen win this national championship. A couple things here. An 8-3 regular season was good enough to get them into the playoffs. For my anti-expansionists in terms of the playoffs, this is why you expand it. You look at UMass going 8-3 that year, you're not picking them to win the national championship, but guess what? They did. In fact, you probably picked Georgia Southern to win this whole thing. They were the number 1 seed overall. UMass came in as the 11 seed. and went on the run that they did, pulling an upset every single round, except for the second round in which Lehigh actually upset Richmond in the first round. So for my anti-expansionists, this is why you expand the playoffs. This is why you give teams the opportunity to get in with an at-large, even from conferences that may not be the Power 5 or now the Power 4. UMass goes on to win this thing and finishes with a national championship. They finish the regular season 8-3. You tack on 4 wins, a 12-3 season with a championship. Not too shabby. So for me, I think the 1998 national championship is the pick for UMass. And UMass folks, let me know if you agree, disagree. All my other folks on this list, obviously, please let me know if you agree or disagree as well. I'd love to get that feedback, would love to get that info from you. For me, it's important to try to get this history right, to try to recognize some of the stuff that's happened in the past because those teams are just as important. It's so easy to get hung up purely on football, purely on basketball. There have been some special teams in other sports that don't get talked about, and I think they deserve to be talked about. That's going to do it for me this week, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am wrapping up my final semester at the University of Toledo, so it may be a week or two before I get another episode out. I'm not going anywhere. I am just letting you all know. I'm just trying to wrap things up so that I can finish out, have a strong end of the year, and start making plans for what's next. That's not just what's next with me, with life. That's what's next with the podcast. What's next with you guys. Thank you guys so much for filling out the fan survey. I really appreciate all the feedback. That's been incredible. And there's some really great ideas in there, things that I'm going to take into consideration and start looking at. So thank you guys so much. This has been a fun project to research, doing a lot of this, looking at this history. Again, I love the history of the schools. I love the history of these programs. There's some cool stuff out there, stuff I had no idea because, again, it doesn't get talked about. But yeah, guys, that's going to do it for me this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you guys are not checking me out on all my socials, what are you doing? Follow me over on Twitter X at the MSC Podcast. You can find it at the same handle on Instagram and TikTok. You can follow me over at YouTube at MSC Podcast or on Facebook at the Mac Sports Connection Podcast. Check out the website. I'm going to be making a few tweaks there soon at www.themscpodcast.com. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, rebuttals, tag me on Twitter, tag me on Instagram, whatever. I wanna be able to help you guys by giving you the information you're looking for. That's gonna do it for me, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.